Alrighty, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our May webinar. We're so excited to have you all here today. I know that there's a lot of people that are probably going to be joining us for the on-demand recording. So whether you are watching after the webinar or you're here live, thank you so much for being here. We are really excited to be discussing crisis and issues planning and management today. And I'm very excited to share this information with you as Bob and Steve kind of take over soon. We think it's vital for every organization, whether you're a for-profit or a non-for-profit, to have a crisis plan ready in the rare case of a major event that occurs that might threaten your organization, the reputation, your community that you serve, your donors, etc. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm really excited to introduce our hosts for today's webinar, Bob Kopak and Steve Singerman, our PGM public relations experts. So thank you both for being here. I'm going to hand things off to them soon so we can get started. But before I do want to remind you all that we will have time at the end of this webinar for a brief Q&A. So feel free to throw any questions that you have in the chat as we hear from Bob and Steve, and we'll answer as many of those as we can at the end. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to get to know our host a little bit more. So we're going to start with Bob Kopak. Bob, thanks so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ashley, and thank you all for joining us to talk about this topic. My name is Bob Kopak. I have my background includes over 30 years of corporate communications experience with both on the client side, the corporate side, and also the agency side, leading communications for Jim Beam Brands worldwide, and then Agave Loco Brands, and then working for agencies, Edelman Public Relations and Ketchum Communications. In addition to that, my experience with philanthropies and not-for-profits are a combination of, the philanthropic work that many of the companies that I worked for were doing and have done, and then those that I work directly for, such as the National Science Olympiad, Eco-Friendly Mobile Farm Stand Project. I also headed up the RumChata Foundation and was a board member of the Illinois Restaurant Association Education Foundation.
It's great to be with you all today. We really appreciate you tuning in. This is an extraordinary topic, and those of us like Bob and myself, I've been in the business for about 40 years. You can't work in public relations that long without encountering quite a few situations with issues that have to be resolved or flat out crises, and that's why we're glad to take on this topic today. I have, like Bob, I've worked both in-house when I was with Terlato Wines, which is headquartered in Lake Bluff. And on the agency side, I worked with some of the biggest global agencies in the world, including Ketchum PR and Edelman. I've worked mostly, if I had to sort of say that the industries I've worked in most, it would be spirits and beer, and in quick service restaurants for about 20 plus years. And in some technology and a few others, but especially in the distilled spirits and beer industries, you encounter quite a few issues related to the industry, related to consumer use, and so as a matter of day-to-day work, you had to work through various situations with issues and at times significant crises. So we're going to go through all that today as best we can. And yeah, please ask some questions at the end. We're here for you.
All right. If you'd like to go in the chat and ask any questions there, and also, just type in your name, where you're from, and everything. That'd be good to know for us. I'll start the presentation with a quote from Warren Buffett. It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you'll do things differently. So that kind of is the umbrella of why we're here today. And when we talk about do things differently, it's really don't wait. Put a plan together now when it comes to being able to address any issues or crises that come up. Of course, it'd be nice if you put that plan together and never ever had to use it. That would be a goal, but it's still good to have that plan ready to go. So that's what we're going to talk about today. If you want to go to the next slide. So I'm going to discuss planning ahead, and planning ahead is really putting that plan together, kind of that system, the process, and items that need to be gathered just in case something happens. So the first step, in doing that is why many of you are here today, is just the idea that you realize you do need a crisis plan. Even if you haven't had a crisis in the past, it is good to make sure you've got something ready to go. In developing the plan, it's definitely a group operation. You may have various departments, you may have various department heads, may have many different locations where we call the advanced coordination is essential to have all those parties understand what this plan is about. So in order to understand what the plan is about, they should also be involved in developing the plan. Lots of homework needs to be done when it comes to developing a plan like this. It's going to take some time. It's not going to happen overnight, especially when you're working in a group and you want to get feedback from the groups in terms of what the best process is to address issues and how to address the issues. There is experiences that you may have from other organizations that you've worked with. There's experience that you may have, from the existing organization, and notes that you want to incorporate in terms of what the best practices are. It's because many times an organization, when it comes to crises and issues management, many times they're judged more on how they handled the situation, not just the issue at hand, but how it was handled. Some are, applauded on how well they handle it. Others can take a lot of heat for how they handle it, not being quick enough, the wrong responses, the wrong kind of responses, getting in front of media too fast, too slow. So if you plan ahead and put a plan together, you'll have the opportunity to make sure that regardless of the issue, big or small, you'll be ready to go. So in terms of this preparation, how the plan is built and looks, the first thing to do, we talked about all the parties involved, is designate this crisis team. And when you're designating the crisis team, so certain people may have different responsibilities, particularly the spokesperson or those a group of people that you feel comfortable having in front of the media. And that we definitely recommend media training for. With the media training, it could be someone who's never done media before that needs a intense type of media training, or it could just be a refresher course, which we definitely recommend. Even if you've been media trained, to go through something every year just as a refresher course, we definitely recommend that. As in that first slide, we talked about this idea of putting the team together. If you're a large organization, you need to make sure that the people in different locations around the country, or around the city, or around the state are leads in those areas when it comes to the crisis team. We're not saying they're spokespeople. We want to designate people as spokespeople in advance, but just the people that need to be communicated with. To that point, a telephone chain needs to be developed where those people all on the crisis team, in addition to those designated in different parts, be it the country, like I said, different offices, need to be on that plan. So all of this is truly goes on paper, written down in terms of the team, the designated people at each locations, the phone chain, all ready to respond if something happens, and it's all in place. It doesn't matter at this point what those specific issues or crises might be. it's all about just being prepared regardless of what comes up. So you have this plan ready to go. In addition to the plan itself, within there needs to be the key messages and a holding statement. Once again, these are a bit generic, just to be able to have as a foundation and a template to fill in the holes that are specific to the issue. And this key message is, basically the idea of we are aware of the issue. We are currently reviewing all the information about this issue, and we will get back to you as soon as we can, or as quickly as we can. So all of these things are put down as a plan, understanding that you don't know exactly what this issue or the crisis may be, but you are ready in terms of how to respond. The people, the messages, the spokespeople, and then key decision makers. All right. The third phase of planning ahead is all about monitoring, evaluating, and an alert process. So it's always good to have someone every day, which you probably already do, just checking the news stories to see if you happen to pop up as an organization. In addition to, we talked about this phone tree. So when something does pop up, and you want to get ahead of things, you have the people to call. That also goes into once the issue is at hand and there's something up, you want it to constantly be monitoring the media in what's happening. The team itself, traditionally, you're looking at all these people should be involved. Corporate communications, the CFO, COO, legal is extremely important. We definitely recommend that legal review any statements, any responses to make sure they're comfortable with it. And then also you've got just your general operations people that are on the ground that need to be part of the loop and input and be able to constantly tell you what's happening on the ground, be it another office or location, wherever that might be. And then finally, once you know what this situation is, it's bringing that small team together that I had mentioned at the very beginning to review the situation and determine the next steps. Kind of you can gauge how bad it currently is, how bad it could be. And then it goes back to the idea of putting that generic plan that we're talking right now into effect in a more detailed way, where you'll know who your spokesperson is based on the event that's happening. You'll know what that statement is that you've already written, but you just need to fill in the information specific to the situation at the time. And then you'll know how to communicate internally also to all the people in terms of what to do. So going back to this phone tree, I think I kind of missed this. One of the things to do is to make sure that people understand, and I've done it in the past where every 6 months, because there's turnover and people at the front desk, to make sure they understand they are not the spokespeople, that they should not respond, and there should be a statement that they have just saying, I'm not the right person to speak to at this moment. Let me take down your information and I will have the right person get back to you. So what we do a lot is send refreshers every 6 months to a year to make sure all the people, the operational people and everyone involved, and even salespeople, if they're hit up, they could be ambushed on the street, if they're doing a sales call or something with media, just because they know they're with that particular organization or company, they need to know that they're not the spokespeople. So once again, it kind of comes down to just having that small team be the leaders and the leadership of the crisis communication plan. Steve, you want to take over?
Okay, so now Bob has walked through what you do in advance, and now let's talk a little bit about what to do when a crisis occurs. But let me also say a crisis situation is a bit like a snowflake. No two are exactly the same. So what you're about to see are potential scenarios and potential responses. We're not able to tell you now exactly what to do when X, Y, and Z happens. We're here to say these are the types of things that we do when a crisis occurs. Now, when you go to the next slide, I do want to say that the crisis work today in issues management is probably different now than it ever has been in my 4 decades of work, and that's because of the political landscape. So when you look at the types of crisis situations that tend to happen, you start with an immediate emergency. That's something that we're all sort of familiar with in business. Something happens at the factory, a fire, mechanical failure, an explosion, someone hurt, God forbid someone killed. I mean, those are the types of emergencies that crisis PR has traditionally worked around. Or a company discovered issue. For you Succession TV show fans out there, you probably, if you watched all 4 seasons, you probably saw the company deal with a shipping crisis and assorted issues. I don't want to recommend that you do what they did. We can talk about that a little bit later. But it's a type of crisis where you figure something out is going on and the rest of the world doesn't know about it yet. So you have to start trying to figure out how to handle it. I'll skip politics for a minute and come back to it. Industry regulatory issue. I've never worked with a company that didn't have to deal with some type of a regulatory issue along the way. A competitor issue. I worked in the beer business for a long time, and I will say Miller Brewing and Anheuser-Busch. Look at any 2 competitors in business in any industry, and issues tend to come up when they compete. So that's another possibility. A supplier distributor issue. It's not my company, but someone who supplies a product in my company has a problem. There's a part issue in an automobile, etc. You can be responsible for that as well to some degree. Outside source discovery issue. Someone comes to you and says, we have found this out about your company. You have seen that on 60 Minutes many times, perhaps. So that's a potential issue. And then a marketing partner, company A and B work together on something and a partner gets involved in a problem that you then have to potentially respond to, or maybe not. To go back to politics for a second, I do think that what's happening in the world right now is unprecedented, at least in my experience, in terms of political issues. Last night I was talking to a few friends about what's going on in Major League Baseball, where an individual player may not agree with a stance taken by the team. That's happening in industries all across the board right now. And it's tough to sit here and tell you exactly how to handle that. You handle that kind of situation the way you do, as we're going to go through all types of issue situations, but they are really touchy. They're very personal. People are very passionate, whatever side of the issue you look at. And it falls to public relations or to help work through that to a great degree. And a lot of companies are having to sort of decide what they want to stand for, how they want to address these things. And oftentimes a PR person will end up working with a CEO or management to help work through that and think about what it is that we want to say and then saying it. But it's happening as we talk, and there will be books written about how to handle public relations in this day and age, in this political environment. Okay, potentially. Now, throughout the next few slides here, we're going to say these are things you might do. We can't, of course, say exactly what to do in terms of answering a situation like a crisis. But the first thing that you tend to do, and it happens the minute you put the phone down, is you go on an internal and external fact-finding mission. You've got to make phone calls. The phone tree that Bob talked about is not only alerting everyone to what happened, but finding out what happened and getting to the facts. You are uniquely situated to know what just happened or what the issue is. You have to find out as much about it as you can. You hate to be caught short later on where a media person tells you something about your organization that you didn't know. If something has happened where danger is involved, you have to contact the authorities if necessary. you will be measured later on how fast you reacted to a potentially dangerous situation. A scorecard in a crisis, a scorecard is kept. So is how long it takes you to alert the authorities will be measured. The next thing that you potentially are going to do, what we tend to do is we start writing a statement in our minds almost the minute this happens. And the types of things you might have to do, write a statement, potentially a news release, maybe a Q&A, which could be either internal or external. And of course, new to the last 7, 8, 9 years of public relations, potential social media posts. Those are things you're going to work with. As Bob said, in preparation for a crisis, when nothing has happened yet, but you want to prepare for what might happen, you're going to designate that spokesperson and have them ready to go no matter what kind of crisis occurs. Reaching out to predetermined media is a tricky stuff, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but that's potential. And alerting employees, boy, this is a tough part of crisis response, but no matter what you do, or no matter how you try to funnel information to a single source, as Bob talked about, your employer, your employees, members of your organization will likely talk as well, and you have to consider that. Okay. In general, as a rule, do not, in a crisis situation, blame others, even if there's in your heart and soul, you think, we weren't responsible for this. The key to most crisis situations is to take responsibility. That doesn't mean take blame. That means take responsibility that we will get to the bottom of this. This is when true leadership has to come to the forefront. You need someone who will say, we as an organization will handle this, we'll manage it the best way possible for our employees, for our customers, for our partners, etc. And then just in general, you have to go into a crisis situation knowing that you're going to be accurate, and you're going to be accurate as the situation goes through down the line. Fudging, gray areas, assigning blame rarely work and usually come back to bite you. Now, I guess I'm repeating myself here, but it's worth it. As Bob said, you try to funnel information down to one source, but employees are typically forgotten, and you need to think ahead of time. How am I going to update my employees? What's the best way to do that? I don't want them necessarily talking to the media. I don't want them spreading rumor or gossip, but I want my employees to sort of be all on the same bandwagon as how we're communicating issues and answers to this situation. So just don't forget employees moving forward. Now, this slide there's a whole lot here, and when you get this in writing, you can kind of refer to it later, but there are all different kinds of media interaction that come up in a crisis, both for print, radio, TV. Your company website can be used, and now these days more than ever, your social media outlets. And by the way, having vibrant social media outlets, a reason why you do that is so in a pinch and in an issues management situation, you have them to rely on to communicate to your audiences, both internal and external. The types of things that we might recommend as crisis specialists, or it's where you react with a written statement to a specific media request. The daily newspaper in your market has made a statement, and you're going to react to them with a written statement. Or you'll decide that a written statement or a press release, depending on the situation, that you will proactively do that to a specific media request. You get it, the daily newspaper asks a question, and sometimes we determine, rather than just respond to that one media source, we're going to put out a press release or a statement that covers all media. Sometimes you do a reactive interview for a media request. Tend not to want to do that in many cases, but you may deem that it's important, so you may get a specific media request that you do an interview for. Or you will designate media. You'll decide, we're going to do an interview with a specific media, whether, again, it's radio, print, TV, it can be any. You determine that during the situation. So those are all the types of media tools that you might use in this situation.
Steve, can I interrupt there real quick?
Please.
That proactive is also the idea of whether or not to even call a press conference if it's
exactly. Another thing that's changed in crisis PR from when Bob and I got in the business is, so no matter what happens, you can assume that there's going to be an enormous amount of social media coverage. So those folks in your organization that cover social media, boy, do you rely on them in a moment like this, because I always find when I go online and try to get a sense of what's happening, I do okay, but it's my social media mavens that do a really nice job of measuring the landscape and what's happening out there. And we have to assume that our social media and what's going on the internet is being viewed by all the audiences that we need to work with, internal and external, and governmental, and in business, etc. So you have to be prepared for that. You have to know it's coming. Determining what's real is just so difficult in these days, but you have to work at that. Your crisis team, as Bob designated, we have to determine what's gossip, what's made up, what is political, what is really happening. What are those facts? You did that fact-finding mission in the beginning. You need to rely on that and determine as best you can what is real. What we have found dealing with social media, and I will admit in the early days, when you wanted to be very responsive to the media and to your customers and to anyone involved in the organization, when something is posted, we reacted. You see something that's true, that you know isn't true, and your gut tells you, I've got to respond to that. But in general, you can't respond to every individual post. You'll spend all morning, night, and doing it, and your message will just spread in unrealistic ways, and it will be inaccurate. And you have to remember, every post triggers another 10 or 15 posts. So in general, don't respond to individual posts.
We actually, Steve and I had an interesting thing come up where someone said something negative, and it was the general public getting back onto reaction of that post, saying, don't listen to this person. You know, this person always is causing problems. So in that case, the general public actually worked for you. So the idea of hesitating and don't respond to every post, you know, sometimes something like that happens where the general audience actually handled everything for you.
Yep. And then while we're saying don't respond to necessarily to every media post, you can use and you should use your website and your social media in order to make statements. Not too long ago, what happens online is extraordinary. I mean, we have launched products and services online. That's how fast the information, once it's there, can spread. I mean, there are products that we've launched without hardly writing a press release. We just make a statement online, direct it to the right audience, and off it goes. So when it comes to writing a statement, potentially sometimes actually a video or a press release, working with your social media posts can be a really effective way to do that, if you so choose, if you think it's appropriate at the time. So to wrap it up, I know that we've given you a whole bunch of different scenarios and maybe an ifs, but that's the way an issue situation works. That's the way a crisis works. There are some, however, there's some golden rules that go with crisis. And that is, once again, to take responsibility, not blame. It is so human to sort of lash out when something happens like that. Sometimes you can feel personally insulted. You feel like you've been lied to. You feel like someone is trying to hurt you, but you have to take a deep breath. You have to be prepared in the way that Bob outlined, and you have to know that your job is to take responsibility. That doesn't mean take blame. It is very difficult for leadership of an organization to get defensive. It's very human, but your job when something negative is happening is to be sympathetic and not be defensive. You will be measured in those critical moments at the beginning and ongoing and how you react to it. And therefore, avoiding knee-jerk responses. So many times I've been in his CEO's office with, as Bob mentioned, legal help, some key product folks. And the first thing that someone, usually a C-suite level person, says is, well, we got to get this out right away. That's dangerous. You've got to avoid those first initial impulses to respond. You need to think it through. You have to be quick and you have to be efficient, but you have to think through what it is you want to say. You need to take appropriate action. Now, this goes to quite often when someone's safety is involved in equipment failures, factory issues on the line, etc. You have to think safety first, safety always. What are we doing to take care of our employees or customers in a crisis situation? And if in a response to a crisis, you make certain promises, we're going to do X, we're going to do Y, we're going to do Z, and we're going to get done by a certain date, you got to deliver. You got to hit your deadlines. Conducting ongoing news analysis. Sometimes when this happens, you just sort of get through it for the first 3 or 4 days or a week, and you don't see as much press coverage, and you just want it to go away. You need to look at the news every day, the general press, online, websites, your social media team. You need to continually do a news analysis. You started doing it at the beginning of the situation. Now you're doing it ongoing. And there comes a point in a lot of crisis situations where you have to sort of all get back together again, assess where you are, and determine what the next communication needs are. You know, every organization has some key stakeholders involved. You've got to continue communication with all those stakeholders in that situation. You can't assume that your key stakeholders are getting their information from the news or from a grapevine. You have to make sure you stay in contact with people that matter and give them regular updates as appropriate. And this is slightly unusual, but important. Once you have moved through a situation, it is a-okay to sort of to say, look, we handled this well, and we're going to be asked about it, whether it's at a board meeting, an informal meeting over coffee, whatever it is. It's okay to say, this situation occurred. Here's how we reacted. We think we reacted very well to it, and we think to a great extent the organization came out of it as well or better than when it first happened. So that's a whole lot of information, I think, and I know a lot of it was sort of preparation and then the way you might react to certain situations. So if we can pinpoint that any further in Q&A, Bob and I would love to do that.
I have a question. Are we allowed to just jump in here? This is Jennifer from Elgin. So we are a nonprofit who, you know, essentially we have a contract with another agency to provide services and support and things like that. You know, so there's been some situations where like a crisis will occur or some sort of PR uproar, and we are in a position of needing to make a statement. What do you do in situations where really, you know, to implore the other agency to also take action, or how do you consider that when you might not be the only agency impacted? And what does that look like in terms of process?
Well, I think that brings up the good point of just planning ahead also, where even before anything happens, you know, do you meet with these other agencies to discuss what that plan would look like and how to respond to issues? If they're willing to all come together and do a meeting, so then at least you know, to your question, you would know how to respond and who the stakeholders and the other groups and organizations you work with. So that kind of goes back to the whole idea of planning ahead. So you bring up an excellent point that those situations happen. Putting a plan together for when those situations happen and how to respond would probably be the first step right now. Okay. But if something were to, Steve, if you want to respond more to the idea of if that doesn't exist, how to respond.
Yeah, right. We kind of dealt with a situation recently where it didn't happen, and now, you know, moving forward, you know, what does this look like in the future, type of thing.
Yeah, a joint statement is best, but if and as Bob said, if you can coordinate that ahead of time and think through what might happen, and everyone agrees that if something happens, we're all going to work together. I understand that's not always the real world. In fact, it may not be the real world. That may not happen in most occasions. So a joint statement is best. But if not, you need to protect your organization. You're likely to have to do a statement on your own at that point. It's not preferred, but it's possible. And that's, it's interesting. One thing, I've done some teaching in PR, and when new students to PR ask me sort of what the heart and soul of PR is, I always used to say, it's bringing as much control as possible to a very uncontrollable situation. And you just asked a really tough question about a situation where you're herding cats, correct? And so you do your best to get them all in the pen at the same time and speak together. But if you can't, you have to protect yourself.
But this could be, the scenario you talk about could be the perfect example to say, organizations X, Y, and Z, we need to get together to discuss what a plan would look like for future crises or issues that may come up.
Yeah, I hate to think that there's an agency out there that wouldn't want to work with you. I would think in most cases they would, but again, if they don't, you always have to protect your stakeholders.
Sure. Well, and I appreciate that. Explanation. And unfortunately, sometimes politics get in the way and things like that. So.
Yeah.
Understood. The other thing is, I wonder if you were to ask them, do they have a issues plan in place? Do they have one?
Yeah, that's probably a good point. And it seems like there's a lot of transitions going on with this particular agency. So it's kind of a situation where, pardon me, I've got a dog here with me. But yeah, it's kind of a situation where there used to be more of a plan. Excuse me. Anyway, sorry. Yes, it's kind of a situation where there used to be more of a plan in place, and now we're kind of discovering as things are unfolding that the situation has changed.
Yeah.
Alrighty, thank you, Jennifer. If there are no further questions, feel free to always drop them in the chat as we're finishing up here. But if there's no further questions, then I will just go ahead and start by thanking Bob and Steve for being here and for giving us your time and sharing all of this awesome knowledge about the proper crisis planning and management. And so now, again, we'll give it like a couple more seconds for those last minute questions. Make sure you get that opportunity because these are the experts. We really want to be able to check in with them if we got time. So I'll give a couple more seconds for you guys.
If anybody has anything down the line, we're around. Sometimes you don't like to ask questions in the, with others in the group. So Bob and I are always available. We love this stuff, and it's fascinating, and it is so topical these days. There's so much happening in the news that these things have to be worked through. We need to, together with our clients, kind of decide how we're going to manage these things, and it's tough. It's tough in this environment. It's a challenge.
Absolutely. All righty, guys. Well, thank you again for being here today. Let's see. Jennifer asks us, do you do workshops that an organization could offer to their members?
Yes.
Awesome.
Bob, what do you think? Yes.
Yes, that'd be fun. Those are fun.
Good idea. Really, really good idea. Bob, we got to put workshops in the presentation. That's a really good idea.
That's it. Well, we will definitely get back to you, Jennifer, about that question. Thank you for posting that. All righty, everyone. Well, thank you all so much for joining in for this webinar, and we will be sending you the on-demand recording of this webinar, as well as Bob and Steve's contact information